There are a ton of JRPGs that still haven't been translated to English. Even with fan translators putting in tons of work, remakes and remasters being a huge money-making tool for developers, even with all of that, there's still plenty more games that haven't seen the light of day outside of Japan. So I wanted to highlight some of the more unique examples ever to not be released in North America. Today, as is many times the case, we start with Falcom. There are two games in the Legend of Xanadu subseries, and they're both very unique titles. In some way, they kind of remind me of the developer Quintet, who made games like ActRaiser. Legend of Xanadu takes multiple genres and smashes them together in a really cool way. Most of the first game plays like Ys, with a bit more story to it, right down to the bump style of combat. But then, when you get into certain areas, and for boss fights, it does something very different. You're suddenly thrown into a 2D side-scroller style of game with some platforming, hacking and slashing your way through stages or bosses with some really high-quality graphics. And it's not some low-quality side-scrolling section either. That's just an afterthought. It's actually a lot of fun to play these sections, to the point where they probably could have made the entire game just those sections, and a lot of people probably would have been happy with that. Unfortunately, it's not currently translated, but hopefully either Falcom themselves or a fan translator will get around to it at some point. PC Engine tends to not get too many translations, so I wouldn't expect it anytime soon. Alshark is one of the more obscure JRPGs out there for some reason, and I say for some reason because it's been released so many times that you think more people would have heard of it, regardless of it never having an English translation. Regardless, it's a really cool game, and by all accounts, is pretty massive, with the one person saying it can take over 60 hours to play all the way through. It's also sci-fi, and you can even get your own spaceship to travel around the galaxy in. Alshark takes place on many different planets that don't necessarily have to be traveled to in a specific order, and along the way you'll be getting to spaceship battles and traveling the planets in buggies, tanks, and hovercrafts. I would love if someone would translate the PC Engine CD version of the game, since the encounters have been cut down a bit, and it has a better interface with more cutscenes. It would be a large undertaking though, so it's pretty understandable that nobody's gotten around to it yet. Maybe someday. Tengai Mako Manjimaru is one of the better games in the Tengai Mako series, also known as Far East of Eden. One of the things that makes this series pretty unique is the use of vibrant animations and graphics, and Manjimaru definitely has that in spades. Manjimaru has a ton of fans within Japan, and it has been re-released many times. It was first released on the PC Engine Super CD, and then on GameCube, PlayStation 2, Nintendo DS, and then PS3 and PSP through the PlayStation Network. Yet, it never got an English translation. Though the English translation man himself, Victor Ireland of Working Designs, said that Manjimaru was one of his favorite games of all time, possibly number one. It plays much like many other games in the Tengai Mako series, fairly similar to Dragon Quest in a lot of ways, but outside of just how great it looks, part of the biggest draw is the script, with all sorts of fun ideas being tossed around, comedic moments, and great characters. A really top-tier RPG for sure. I'm hoping that eventually somebody with cash in the industry will wise up and realize that they can make some money releasing these in English, but until then, I guess we'll just have to wait. Very few things hurt my soul as much as this one. The original Grancer was never translated to English somehow, even though many of the other games in the series were. Grancer 1 is considered the best in the series, and it even has a PSP version with even more additional content. The reason that Grancer is such a good game is in part due to the way that the story is presented, including the characters. Characters are fun, unique, with personalities that easily shine through the dialogue, and a big part of that is in making decisions that you make matter. Depending on what you do, there are missable characters, there's even a town simulation much like in Grancer 4, there are a ton of different choices that you make throughout the game that can affect your affinity with characters, leading to potential romances and different endings. Basically all of the cool things that everyone asks for in JRPGs. And on top of that, the combat system is fun. It plays out similarly to other entries in the Grancer series, But it's a bit of a prototype for those games, so don't expect to be quite as well done or complicated as other entries. Still, it's more than good enough as it is. It's a travesty that this game hasn't been officially translated, or fan translated. Zavas II is the game on here that I know the least about, and that's in part due to it being on the PC-98, a Japanese retro PC that most people in North America don't even know exists. So there's a lot less information on the game because of that. But I will tell you one thing, the opening sequence is a combination of weird, hilarious, and slightly concerning. It does a much better job than I do of getting that across, so here you go. Yes, that man did just kick a baby into a pool. And yes, you do have control over whether that baby swims to the other end. It's just the start of many coming-of-age ceremonies you go through to determine your starting stats. And yes, you can fail, and the baby does die. This is a very interesting one, as it seems to be a combination of Emerald Dragon in terms of the combat system and Uncharted Waters, with the ability to sail around the world to different locations and a fairly open world story, but I couldn't really tell you what the story is, unfortunately, since I don't know Japanese. And there's even a secondary combat system for ship battles that looks like a ton of fun. Whatever the case, the game looks really cool, and hopefully someday I'll be able to play it with a translation. All of the games that I've shown here don't have an official translation, unofficial translation, or a fan translation, so unfortunately, unless you know Japanese, playing through them would leave out a large part of what makes these games great. But we're getting closer and closer to the point where we can play them through machine translation technology. If you have a lot of patience and are willing to allow for some mistakes, there are already tools that will auto-translate for you by taking snapshots and translating through Google Translate, DeepL, and ChatGPT. It can be a bit hit or miss, though. So I hope you enjoyed learning a bit about some untranslated games. There are plenty more like these, and this probably won't be the last time I talk about them. I always love showing off games that people haven't heard of. Until next time.